Dancing the Four Quarters, Visions of Grassroots Masculine Leadership, an interview by Robert Moore and Forrest Craver. This program, made in the 1990s, concerns masculine empowerment and development of the male psyche. According to Dr. Moore, the masculine psyche is in fact made up of four distinct spaces, what was known in mythology as four quarters: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. A mature man is a man who is able to embody the concerns that are appropriate to each of these sectors of the male psyche. Although this recording was made in the 1990s, the information contained within is as valid today as it was then. Men's work is as important today, perhaps even more important than it was in the 1990s. Some of the references made in this recording are to materials that may not be readily available, and the various men's movements described have coalesced around the Mankind Project, or MKP. Additional recordings by Robert Moore may be found by visiting his website, www.robertmoore-phd.com, or by visiting the website of IS Publications, www.is-publications.com. Information about the Mankind Project and its various programs may be found at www.mankindproject.org. And now, welcome. Come into the circle and let us begin the dance.
I want to begin with the opening context that men's work is accelerating rapidly across the country and even internationally with the formation of hundreds of men's groups and thousands of men's support groups. We have a proliferation of books coming out on masculine psychology in North America, and many different perspectives and remedies are being put forth. Once men begin to get involved in men's work and counsel work, many basic questions arise for them, and our challenge here in this interview time is to set forth some basic context, imagery, and ideas that can offer the components for a compelling vision to shape men's work over the next 5 years. And could you begin, Dr. Moore, with what you see as being some of the key contextual components of this work?
Well, I think that in our time, that probably the single most important way that we need to context what we're doing with men in the United States and abroad is looking at the international, global, one might even say planetary context of this work. I was very gratified recently to be able to be present at a showing of the Omnimax, the film The Blue Planet, at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And I was touched by the way in which that film enables us to see the genius of Joseph Campbell in his one of his last books called The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, in which he challenges us to take human initiation and human mythology to a post-tribal planetary context. And so the first thing we can say about anybody that's thinking about strategy in men's work today in a larger public way, we have to take the ecological context of the planet as the first major context.
Okay, and as we do that, I think there are several men that we want to acknowledge for their key leadership role over the last 10 to 12 years, and who in your mind would be some of those men that we owe a great debt of gratitude to?
Well, I think the first thing we have to say is that anytime we are giving some sense of appreciation to the leadership, we have to start with the poet Robert Bly, who for over a decade now has been serving as a catalyst to open men up to a new kind of gender consciousness, a new approach to being consciously masculine, which hasn't really existed, I believe, since the beginning of the decline of tribal cultures. So Robert Bly is really the major catalyst for this movement. It would be irresponsible not to mention in that same context the enormous contribution of Michael Meade, who has been a colleague and collaborator with Bly since the very beginning. It's been Michael Meade's skills in organization and networking, and increasingly through the years, the capacity to contain the powerful emotional energies generated in these men's gatherings that has made him so important to the work as it has developed and continuing today. I think it's also important to name the psychoanalyst James Hillman, the Jungian analyst James Hillman, whose seminal work in archetypal psychology has been a major resource for men as they try to get into the psychological roots of their interest in the mythopoetic perspective. There are many others that we could name across the country, the leaders of men's centers and of various networks.
Right. Okay, thank you. And then there are a number of regional leaders that are emerging across the country, and certainly Tom Daly, who's the director and founder of the Boulder Men's Council Project and is training hundreds of men in ritual process, would be an example of that.
Tom is widely respected as a creative leader. You mentioned the importance of ritual. We'll be getting more into that later in this interview. But there are many of us that are deeply appreciative to Tom for his innovation and his engagement with the important task of helping men to ritualize their needs and their empowerment as men.
Right. One of the reasons that we decided to make this tape was for men not only in large urban areas, which may already have a lot of support group and men's council activity, but also for you men out in rural communities across America and other places in small towns. And I want to ask Dr. Moore, if a man reads an article about the men's movement and wants to get involved in men's work, what is the pathway that you think? What are the first steps in a man acquainting himself with the materials of the men's movement?
You know, Douglas Gillette, my co-author, who's another person that I think we should mention, who's been deeply involved in working with me in getting these books on masculine psychology out to the public. Douglas and I often receive letters from men who've read this initial book asking us that kind of question. And one of the things that I always try to say to them is they need to, in addition to looking at the Moyers interview with Robert Bly that's available now from public television, they should read Bly's book, Iron John, a book about men, published by Addison Wesley Publishing Company, which has been a bestseller on the national bestseller list for some time. Of course, let me give a little commercial for my own work here. The C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago has a number of audio tapes available, which outline a lot of the concerns of masculine psychology in audio tape form. But in terms of really getting involved in the men's work, we have to do much more than just work on the what I like to call the magician side of this. Men need to find other men who are deeply committed and engaged in serious men's work. The best way I've found for men to do that is to turn first of all to Wingspan, which I believe to be currently the leading men's publication in helping men across the United States and internationally to network around events, around books, around resources, and in other important ways. And so we should lift up Wingspan, and you should give, at this time, maybe, of course, you could tell them how they could get hold of Wingspan if they haven't got the address.
Okay, Wingspan is a 16-page tabloid publication which offers a national schedule of events, provocative interviews of leaders in the men's movement, and it's a free publication. It's published quarterly, and it's available by writing to Wingspan, Box 1491, Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts. And if you send your name in, and we also encourage a small contribution to help us defer the cost. And when you write in, you can order in quantities of 50, so you could get 150, 100, 150, or so forth if you want to spread the word around to your community.
I'd like to just say, as someone who is not a member of the Wingspan staff, I'd like to say that we men around the country and around the world are indebted to the people like Forrest Craver here, but others who have made such a tremendous contribution to the creation and the development of Wingspan. And Forrest, can you name some of the important persons that have made?
Sure. The publisher Bob Frenier started this publication in 1986, and for several years it was about the level of 5,000. We're currently reaching 150,000 men and women in the U.S. and increasingly overseas as well. And in addition, Chris Harding, the senior editor, has been a key leader in getting people to commit to write articles. And so we have had feature lead articles of Robert Moore, Michael Meade, and other leaders in the men's movement.
Let me just say that Chris Harding has inspired a lot of us men around the country who are concerned that the men's movement have a scope which includes more than just our private, personal, and recovery concerns, but which includes a wide dimension of social and public concerns. Chris has provided tremendous leadership on that front, and we're indebted to him.
Okay, I wanted to go on now, Dr. Moore, and talk about the role of inner work and also the role of men in community. And a lot of men coming into the men's movement enter through the door of recovery programs, 12-step programs, or they enter through being involved in some kind of therapy, often times Jungian analysis. And while we have excellent books like Robert Johnson's Inner Work and so forth, why, in your opinion, is inner work not enough to develop a strong masculine self-image? And if you could also address in that your current understanding about the urgent need for male affirmation by other men.
Yeah, let me just put the on the table here my belief that I have been able in my research to decode the deep structures of the masculine self, and the significance of looking at the structures of the masculine self are really much deeper than simply relating to one's private psychological concerns. What Douglas Gillette and I have been trying to write about in this series of books is the way in which the masculine psyche is, in fact, made up of four distinct spaces, what was known in mythology as four quarters. And as many of you listeners know, we have designated we have named these different programs in the masculine psyche as the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. Our sense is that a mature man is a man who is able to embody the concerns that are appropriate to each of these sectors of the male psyche. The concern about recovery is a concern about becoming whole psychologically and personally. That is something that is related to healing in liminal space, what we call transformative space. But what we notice if we look at the structure of the masculine psyche is that when a man does become whole, when he gets a cohesive self, He's not just interested in the practice.
There are some nuances in your book that I think are covered in much more detailed format in the excellent tapes available from the Jung Institute of Chicago, which really, I believe there are 8 tapes on each of the 4 archetypes, correct?
That's right.
And it really, even if you have read the Moore Gillette book, I found tremendous additional value in the tapes themselves. So I would urge you to get the tapes as well and listen to those.
One of the things that we point out in these books and in these tapes that I think it's important for us, Forrest, to put some flesh on this concept of initiation, masculine initiation. And what we like to say is that if you're going to understand what initiation is about, you have to start with understanding that it is empowerment of the masculine self. And if you understand that there are fundamentally 4 discrete powers built into the structure of the masculine self, then you understand that when you talk about initiation, you're not talking about one initiation. You're talking about 4 initiations in 4 different sectors. In psychoanalysis today, they like to talk about different lines of development in the personality. And we say that that's very important, but that instead of there being 1 line of development or 2 lines of development, there are actually 4 lines of development in the masculine psyche. And these are the line of development related to the King program, which is a line of development related to the use of power for caring and inclusive nurture, or what we've called blessing before. There's the line of development related to the warrior, which is a man being able to access and integrate and steward his aggression. There's the line of development related to cognitive development, in which a man develops his intellectual and cognitive abilities and begins to turn them to seeing through fundamentalisms and getting to the point where he can see clearly the way the plumbing of the world and his personality operate. There's the line of development related to the lover program, which is the line related to affection, to emotion, to relationship, the capacity for joyful embodiment. So when we're working with men on initiation issues in men's groups, what we've got to be doing is making sure that we're attending and helping men attend to each of these 4 powers.
Okay, and in terms of the initiatory process, we mentioned Tom Daly's work with the Boulder Men's Council Project, and certainly we'd also want to mention the New Warrior Network of Chicago and Milwaukee, which is doing outstanding work on initiation into the warrior archetype. What is the role of structure really in these initiatory processes? We have a lot of people who tend to be skeptical about men's councils and skeptical about the value of structure. But as a therapist and someone who's worked on human transformation for a long time, I'm sure you have some insights.
Well, let me start out there, Forrest. Let me start with a therapeutic context, but then let me widen this to evidence that we have from anthropology and from primate ethology. And let me just begin by saying that increasingly, those of us that work in psychotherapy and the mental health professions, we're increasingly aware of how irresponsible it is for us to work with individuals to get them in touch with the richness of their psychology, and then when we terminate psychotherapy with them, not make a concerted, careful effort to relate them to community organizations, to voluntary associations, to ongoing networking with private and public organizations which can help support the richness of their lives and enable them to make a contribution to not only their families but their community and the wider world. That we realize now that we used to be very much in error when we did not help people see the social nature of health.
And, of course, James Hillman has come out increasingly with forceful statements about that. We've had a generation of depth psychology, and yet public immorality and behavior of leadership has more shadow elements now than in previous generations. And he's really attacking that point very strongly.
One of the, Jim Hillman and I, of course, have some theoretical disagreement, but in these areas we have concerted agreement and very similar visions. Jim has been making a tremendous contribution in calling us to accountability and to responsibility, to facing the fact that the problems which face the human species now will not be answered solely in the consulting room of Jungian analysts in particular, but of any psychotherapist, that they're much larger. One of the exciting aspects of Hillman's work has been the work that he's done on the understanding the centrality of the concept of the city, of the polis,
right,
in human life. And men need to find out what Hillman has to say about that and to engage with him in reflection about being men in the context of the polis, or I would even say, Douglas Gillette and I like to say, in the context of the cosmos, the world of justice and peace.
Right. And so, for example, in the context of men's work, we could say that from an ethical standpoint, attending a men's support group or even attending a support group and a council simply would not be enough in terms of mature masculinity. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think, let me just continue this idea about, let's just talk a minute about containment first. That is to say, when a man is seeking to deal with his pain and his grief and his past, he has to find a place that can contain his pain and help him deal with it without really becoming psychotic or addictive and acting out in some ways. Group work enables him to do that. We've already said that it's important, though, as a man gets stronger, to take his energy and to channel it in things which relate him to the wider world, to other people, to the other sex, to the other gender, to family life, to community life, to political life, and to, well, let's go back to our primary context, to the ecological challenges that face us all. A man who is empowered and getting healthier is going to want to be involved in those ways. Now, this is a place where I'd like to bring in the work of Lionel Tiger, whose work, Men in Groups, is an important anthropological and ethological work which men should be aware of.
Okay, I wanted you to speak on that because there's been a very strong and pointed feminist attack on men and blaming them, and a lot of shaming about what has happened in the world. But I think what you're about to say may offer a new viewpoint about how men have stewarded the community in the past.
Well, there's a lot of research now that men need to be aware of that in the context of human evolution and even before that in primate evolution, that men in groups have tended to bond together to respond to the crises which face the primate community in the challenge of survival. And that is to say, it has been men in groups, according to these researchers who have looked at this over a period of over 14 million years, that it's been men in groups who have gotten together, who have empowered each other, who have identified the nature of the crisis facing the human group, and who have then begun to strategize and form tactics to ensure the survival of the group, both masculine and feminine, and the children as well. And so, now, this is an important context for us to think about in terms of the nature of masculinity. We're not saying that females cannot and should not bond together for the same goal, but we're simply pointing men to their heritage, to looking back to our ancestors, to our elders of the past, who bonded together to respond to common crises. Mm-hmm. And part of the hope that I believe that we have today in the face of of the challenges which tend to immobilize us a lot is that we may be able to draw on this socio-biological, this evolutionary heritage in the male psyche to help us bond together once again in facing up to responding effectively to our common public and planetary problems. Now, so when we're talking about men's work and we're talking about recovery, we have to ask the question, well, recovery for what? Recovery and empowerment for what? In other words, here's where the big word that we've gotten aware of in recent years, stewardship, comes in. In other words, we can empower men and initiate men in each of these four powers.
Right.
And we can and we should, and we are doing that now increasingly. But the question at the highest level of masculine development is, okay, I'm empowered now, so what?
Right, and this is a penetrating question. I've had even men who have been men's council leaders or support group leaders asked, what is the next step in this evolution of men's work? What comes after recovery, after the mythopoetic awareness that Bly and Mead and others have put forward, so wonderfully. What is the role of men in men's councils? Is it only to do ritual process? Is it only to do personal healing, or is the men's council perhaps a seedbed for the formation and training of men who will then move out and provide leadership in task forces or in empowering the great social movements of our time?
Right here, we need to address what is going to always be with us as centrifugal tendencies in the men's work. These centrifugal tendencies, that is, for us to split apart on our agendas and what we emphasize, we need to realize that this is not just a matter of history. This is not just a matter of our current context. That this tendency to split is built into the very deep structures of our psyche. And so, whenever we're talking about this kind of question, we need to constantly come back to understanding we have got to make sure we attend to the four quarters. And that means that when we empower men, heal them, help them recover, and help them feel their joy as empowered men, we're not asking them to turn aside from their lover needs. We're not asking them to turn aside from dancing and drumming.
Right.
We're not asking them to turn aside from a sense of joyful sexuality.
Right.
And their enjoyment of literature and poetry and myth. But that we are trying to help men to see that this joy, this magnificence that a man can be when he gets fully empowered, this carries over into all the quarters. The great sacred king that is our image of fully empowered masculinity.
Right.
He danced his way through his public responsibilities as well.
Right.
And so what we want to emphasize there is that one of the things you and I were talking this weekend, and one of the things that I've been studying recently to get a sense of really committed masculine warriors and knights. I've been studying the history of the Knights Templars.
Right.
And one of the things I discovered about their sense of themselves as they were going into battle for what they believed in is that they had a battle cry, and it was to each other. They would say to each other, "Be glory."
Right.
Be glory.
Right.
And so this sense of magnificence that fully empowered men have in all these quarters carries over into their engagement with trying to bring justice and peace and right order to their world as they understand it.
Right. Now, you mentioned the powerful image of Lord of the Four Quarters. For our listeners, could you give them a reference on that? You're working on the republication.
Yes, one of the men that we're very indebted to for helping us to understand the role of the king program in masculine psychology is the Jungian psychiatrist John Weir Perry. find in libraries, the old version of it was entitled The Lord of the Four Quarters, Myths of the Royal Father. And we are republishing that now in the series that I edit with Paulus Press under the title Lord of the Four Quarters, The Mythology of Kingship. And that should be out in the fall of 1991.
Right, and we talked about in the retreat here in Washington this weekend. Perry also has an excellent other book called The Heart of History, and the subtitle is The Individuality and Evolution, and it's the State University of New York Press. And he talks about how the king archetype has moved from a public, external, physical king into an internal archetypal energy.
We all need to become, especially the leaders of the men's movement, need to become familiar with all of his books because they set the context for this discussion of the importance of the king and masculine psychology today. He's a tremendous influence on me and on Douglas Gillette. In fact, the King volume in our series of books picks up where Perry has left us on that and continues to deepen our reflection on the king archetype. And without John Perry, we couldn't have done this at all.
Right. We began talking about the important role of men historically in stewarding and husbanding the community and protecting women and children. Can we go on, and can you say more about, we've talked some about the crucial importance of the king in the retreat this weekend, given our deteriorating sociological situation in our local communities, with our young people, with the mentally ill on the streets of our city, homeless men and women. Can you talk about the cruciality specifically of that king energy?
Yeah, I would like to begin our discussion about that by just noticing that if you study Plato, in Plato's vision of a man living in the world, he had the idea that a man ought to have two homes.
Mm-hmm.
He ought to feel at home on the periphery of the kingdom,
mm-hmm.
but he also ought to have a home at the center, in the central city,
in the polis.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a wonderful image for us to think about. That is to say, a mature man ought to be at home in liminality, on the edge,
mm-hmm.
in the woods,
right.
in the desert, in the wilderness, in his vision quest. And he ought to be able to return to that as needed.
Mm-hmm.
But he also ought to take as his goal to feel at home at the center, at the axis mundi. In the center of the city, which represents the center point of order, right order of peace and justice. The deterioration of our cities. I live in Chicago. The condition of my city tells me that we men in Chicago have not adequately attended to the needs of the center in our city. Let me give you an example now for contrast. I really love my city, and one of the things I enjoy, my wife and I will spend a lot of time just walking through the great buildings of our city and enjoying the architecture, and architectural tours, and taking the boat tour, looking at the architecture of the great architects of Chicago. One of the other things we do is we try to get a sense for Chicago history. And one of the things that is of note to men is we look back in the 19th century, in the progressive period, there were groups of absolutely outstanding public men in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Men like Burnham, without whom we wouldn't have any of our park systems. Mm-hmm. Men like Victor Lawson, the great journalist and publicist, without whom many of the immigrants to Chicago wouldn't have had any kind of adequate attention. Men like Graham Taylor, who founded social work and was one of the founders of the Chicago Theological Seminary in its current form, where I teach. But anyway, men who had a sense of the public and were passionately committed to building a city that was hospitable and humane for all of its people, of all races and all backgrounds.
Right.
Now, we don't have that today in my city,
Right,
Chicago.
right. And so what I want to ask you next is how can we really bring the king energy online for men, and what is the role of men's council and other men in helping men get that king energy? And if you could bring in your work with Kohut and the importance of self-psychology.
All right. Well, let's just think about how men feel when we talk with them about our common responsibilities as men in the public and dealing with all these public moral and ethical and social justice issues. All of us begin to feel overwhelmed very rapidly when we begin to think about these things. One of the things which Heinz Kohut, the brilliant founder of what we know today as psychoanalytic self-psychology, has given us is our understanding of how much we need each other if we're going to feel empowered enough to address our common task. Now, let's think about this in the context of what we were talking about earlier in terms of Lionel Tiger's work, because now Heinz Kohut has given us a sophisticated psychology of the reasons why we must bond together in groups to address these issues. Why? Because if you and I look at these problems as isolated individuals, we will be so overwhelmed by our inadequacy in the face of them that there's no way that we will be able to respond effectively to them. We will have to go into denial or go into wild turkey
addiction,
or go into something else to get away from it.
Right, and isn't that the same point that David Gilmour makes so powerfully in his book, Manhood in the Making, Yale University Press, 1991, in which you've talked about the crucial importance of that book for men's work because it's a cross-cultural study of men.
Yeah,
and
people ought to look at it.
And I think Gilmour makes very clear that masculinity is really a fragile psychological reality, and that men really rely and need strong and rich stimulation by other men. Is that your analysis?
Yeah, and I want to just emphasize that we can see that need of men for other men in a lot of ways. It's not that we are so weak. It's that the responsibilities we face as men are so large.
Right.
And so when we see, the thing that concerns me is that in my generation, no one ever helped men like me understand that our responsibilities were so large that we must get into male bondage.
Right.
To become empowered enough and to strategize enough and to form common tactics that would be effective. No one ever explained to us the way this has operated in history and in evolution to enable men to deal with the threats to the human community.
Right, and especially now, right, in our social context, because men in the public domain now have so much more to carry in terms of social responsibility and declining resources, the environment, and all those problems, right?
That's absolutely right. Now, we always have to be aware of the shadow side of male bonding. And, the critics of the men's movement today, many often, like, for example, when Michael Mead and I were doing an interview with the Canadian Film Board, one of the final questions that the gentleman asked us was, well, now when men get together, he said, what you get is the Nazi SS. And, certainly the Nazi SS was a male bonding group. There's no question about that. There's been a good bit of research on that. But when you have men bonding together, you also get civil rights movement. You also get the Franciscans. You also get all the other empowered and strong movements that begin to serve a common vision. The critical issue here, and this is something we must emphasize again and again, especially among the leadership in the men's movement today, we must constantly hammer away that a man can be a fully empowered warrior with a lot of good energy, but if he is serving a tribal, fundamentalist, pre-modern, racist, sexist, classist vision, all of that wonderful warrior energy which he has struggled so hard to develop, and which he has sought to find comrades in arms to act out, will be serving demonic ends. So the critical issue we have to look at here is that when men are developing that warrior energy, that male bonding for strategic effect and tactical effectiveness in struggle, they need to be clear that their king energy, the true king within, is helping them become inclusive enough in their vision.
Right.
This is why it's so wonderful today. And excuse me if I keep coming back to this, but I keep coming back to the privilege that we have that our forefathers did not have. And that is, recently, I mentioned going to that blue planet at the Omnimax.
Right.
I took my 81-year-old mother with me. And I was very sad that my father was not able to be there and to see this. Because during his life, he never had the ability to look at the earth in this particular rich form that we have in that blue planet Omnimax.
Right.
One of the fondest memories though that I do have with him was in 1969 when the NASA orbital flight of the moon first was achieved. My father and I sat and listened to Frank Borman and the other men read from Genesis as they rounded the moon. And I guess that may be one of the fondest memories I have being with my father around these issues.
Right, right. And of course, Joseph Campbell, the noted mythologist who did the most popular series ever in the history of public broadcasting, said that as soon as the space vehicle took that photo of the Earthrise, the possibility for a whole new mythology was born, because we saw that the Earth had no boundaries and it had no exclusive framework. This is talking about how the Earthrise, the symbol of the Earth, that mystical blue-green ball in space, and its magnificent beauty, showed us that there was one Earth, and there were no boundaries, there were no sectarian frameworks around it.
I don't think there's any way in the world that we can overemphasize the significance of the point you're pressing there. Because the thing that excites me so much, and the thing that makes me sense so much the importance of this men's work in our current context, is that I really believe that for the first time in human history, we have the opportunity to focus on real human initiation. All tribal cultures thought they were focusing on human initiation. They intended to be focusing on human initiation.
Right.
But because of the limits of their vision, and they were not able to see what we are able to see today from space, they were not able to get past a tribal vision. Today, for the first time in millions of years, we have the opportunity to take all of this knowledge from the tribal Old Testament that we bring together as men, and we have the opportunity to steward that enormous treasure house of understanding of initiation, and of masculine maturation, but in a post-tribal, planetary, human context.
Right, and I also want to bring up within an interspecies context, or within the framework of interspecies bonding, I recall mentioning John Stokes, the noted tracker and leader of men's events, has talked about how the native people see the animals are coming in and they're warning us. And about 3 years ago, there was this extraordinary example in Washington where a stag, a male deer, came out of Rock Creek Park about 3 miles away, walked up to the front gate of the White House, put his rack in the metal gate and broke off his rack, and then wandered around the city of Washington in a catatonic state for several hours until the Park Service took him back into the park. Certainly the plants and the animals are calling out to us, aren't they? Isn't initiation involving not only human initiation, but interspecies bonding. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, just a word about that particular event. The news recently reported that for the first time in recent history, there appears to be some hope that we might be able to bring the population explosion under control. If the United States would up its funding only by a few $1 billion to enable us to address the aspirations of the developing nations along these lines, we find that the Bush administration is not responding to the needs on these population issues as much as they could be. So this deer losing its rag at the gate of the White House, that's what we Jungians would call a kind of a synchronistic event.
Right.
We have to call our leaders. Let's get into one thing here. We have to get away from our tendency to idealize leaders. We have to realize that what our responsibility to leaders are is to call them to accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And we admire their positive qualities, but we do not give away our king power to leaders. And when they are not stewarding our nation and its resources for the larger human need, we need to use our king energy and our warrior energy to call these people to accountability.
Right, and we have some men of enormous vision and idealism and great sense of community. We were talking earlier about Ted Turner and how he has used his Better World Society and the enormous power cable news network to interrelate overpopulation and environmental issues and point to some of the failures of public policy. And then also,
let me respond to that on Ted Turner before we go on. I think it's very important for men everywhere to find out about Ted Turner's Better World Society and what it's doing, and get involved in trying to support what he's trying to do there. If we could get together as men on a vision of what it would mean to empower men worldwide in trying to turn this planet into a humane environment. If we can provide a vision for that, the interesting thing is Ted Turner has got the technology to help us communicate it.
Right. And then in our retreat here this weekend, when we were asking for names of books and movies, we saw how Kevin Costner's name came up repeatedly as the most impacting movie. Men had shared about 15 men said it had been the most impacting movie of their lives. And
the Dances with
Wolves. And not only that, but The Untouchables, and now he's making Robin Hood. It seems he's pulling back the veil, and he's really showing that chivalric part of masculinity.
Kevin Costner, in a way, has done more to help us see the positive, powerful, redemptive side of the masculine soul than a great many people in recent history. And he's a young man, and we're indebted to him for what he is doing and what he may do in the future on helping us embody these values that we share as men in forms that can communicate to the widest possible audiences.
Right, and I was really heartened when I interviewed James Swan for the Wingspan interview on Sacred Space. He told me how Kevin Costner was empowering his program of the Buffalo Project, which is to bring the buffalo back to the Plain States and to the reservations. And so Kevner seems to be not only talking the talk, but really walking the walk.
I think that's true. It's exciting to think what could happen if men in their networking and their mutual empowerment and their innovation and in their creativity start bringing their unique resources to bear on these challenges which we share. I'm not an optimist. I love to say, Forrest, that I'm not an optimist about anything.
Right.
But the reason that I involve myself with men's work is because every time I'm with a group of men like we're working with this weekend, I come away hopeful
Right.
about the future.
Right.
I come away believing that that there's just a chance that if we do what our forebears did, and we bond together in the face of common threat,
Right.
We may win the war for the earth.
Right.
End of CD number 1. Dancing the Four Quarters, CD number 2.
The hunger for knowledge, the hunger to really understand and embody mature masculinity. Seeing you at the breaks, you were just besieged with men, and hardly had a chance to go to John. There just seems, and the hands were constantly up throughout the seminar. There just seems to be an enormous hunger for real knowledge about authentic masculinity.
But you know what I'm really, and I want to say thank you to all of you men out there who have taken the time to write me letters, and I owe you letters because I'm about 6 months behind in my correspondence and so forth, and some of my phone calls. But let me say thank you to you for taking the time to write me and to share with me your enthusiasm for what men can do together. And what you have shown me, both in your letters and in your comments at these conferences, is men, this is the thing that really touches me, Forrest, that men have so much energy to get in the harness and pull on this common project. There was a young man that came up to me in one of the breaks yesterday. And he was about in his early 20s. And his energy for being a committed
Right.
warrior on behalf of the planet was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And he was simply wanting to know, well, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go to plug my energy in?
Right.
And this is back to your issue about what men's councils can do, besides helping us get empowered.
Right, and I want to say that, you know, with Wingspan, I get a lot of letters and phone calls, and I got a lot of men who've been involved in different social movements, in religious movements, and so forth. And what I hear is a pained, very painful disenchantment with some structures in the past that did carry the day. A lot of pain about denominational and local church activity that's not working very effectively. A lot of men in the academic community who are really disenchanted with that and the total intellectualizing and the reductionistic approach to the community, and even professors in theological seminaries of long standing just talking about their pain over the moral abdication of the polis.
Let me just comment on the churches and the seminaries and men's work. I like to say to church groups and groups of ministers around it that we're going to have to decide soon in churches, the synagogues of this country, whether we're really interested in ministering to and with men on behalf of all of these issues. Because there's this thing that goes around today, many of you have heard about this, called what is politically correct.
Right.
Well, what is politically correct in many places in the churches and in the universities and the seminaries today is male bashing.
Right.
And, you know, when I'm working on calling men to face up to our aggression, some people accuse me of male bashing. I don't think I'm a male basher. I like to call us to accountability for our energies. But there is a lot of male bashing and demonization of the masculine gender that goes on in these circles, and it is accepted as politically correct. I think we have to stand firmly against that. And I think we have to call our religious leaders, our theologians, and so forth to accountability and to challenge them on their sexist attitudes toward our gender. And we have to challenge them. We have to say to them, look, you need to wake up and smell the coffee. You need to look around and see that men are not neglecting masculine spirituality. Men all over the country and increasingly around the world are engaging masculine spirituality in powerful, innovative ways. It's just that the churches
Right.
are not committed to stewarding masculine spirituality. spirituality.
Right.
They're going to have to get serious, and they're going to have to make some decisions about where they stand with regard to this.
Right. And I want to bring in at this point that about 2 months ago I was invited by a group of Northern Virginia churches near where I live to do a retreat of men in those 5 churches, and I'm planning to do that in the next couple of weeks. And it really occurred to me that it was time for me to go sit down and talk with the Methodist Bishop of Washington about what relationship the Methodist Church is going to take to the men's movement, because in the past, when movements like this have come along, if the church has shunned it, it has led to the splitting of a lot of activity, and there's been in the past some hostility of denomination to men's society groups.
So that's a big issue, and we've got to press this. I don't want to draw that too negatively, though, because recently a group of Methodist leaders, United Methodist leaders out in the West, invited Robert Bly to come out and to speak to them to a large conference of ministers, male and female ministers, about these issues, and he had a warm welcome.
Right.
And he had an enthusiastic response. And as you know, we're planning a conference on men in ministry in Chicago in October of '91. So these issues are being engaged now, and let's move on to some of the other groups that, you know, when we say what do we do with men and men's councils, then once they start feeling better and they start feeling strong and want to plug in their energy, let's talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that already exist for these empowered men with a vision, to begin to exercise their influence.
Right. What are some of the major big network structures that have thousands of local activities around the country, or even around the world?
Well, I was walking along the streets in Evanston recently, and a man came up to me with his children with him, and he said, you know, I was at the conference you and Bly did in Indianapolis recently, and you didn't mention the Boy Scouts.
Right.
And he began to tell me about his work. This man began to tell me about his work with Boy Scout organizations and with other boys clubs in the Chicago metropolitan area. And as I began to listen to him and to think about the opportunities which exist for men to provide really significant cultural leadership through the Boy Scouts organizations, I began to be excited. And another personal note here, I began to realize that in my childhood, growing up on an isolated ranch in the Southwest, I remember that one of the things that I grieved about a lot as a boy is not being able to be a part of the Boy Scouts. I've only recently realized how much I lost because I never had an opportunity to be involved in that. And so the Boy Scout organization, we're indebted to these men who get very little appreciation for the kind of time and effort they spend in Boy Scouts organizations. And we need to have men start moving into that work in a powerful way, because the network already exists.
Right. And it's time to bring them into publications like Wingspan and interview them, give them the kind of public acknowledgement and affirmation that they so deserve.
Well, one of the things that we've been emphasizing across the country increasingly with Robert Bly's help and others is the importance of expressing appreciation to each other for our contributions. And I love the way Robert says, one of the things that Robert will say when we'll get through with some particular presentation, Robert will say, well, we'll take some applause now.
Right.
And then after the applause, he'll say, we needed that.
Right.
Well, this is true for all of us.
Right.
We need to stop being ashamed of receiving the applause that we deserve, and we need to give men the applause they deserve for their involvement.
I just wanted to mention the same thing. This is on the note of blessing other men with our energy. I did a retreat in Gettysburg several weeks ago, and it was very powerful. And I took the men to see an 80-year-old American history teacher from my high school. He was also my homeroom teacher. He did a 2.5-hour masterful presentation in the backyard of his home, and he gave us 40-page handouts, and he had the men really enthralled. And at the end, everyone thanked him, and as everyone was getting in the cars, he pulled me aside, and he said, did they really like it? And I said, well, of course they really liked it. And he said, well, I wanted them to really, really express their gratitude. And this is an 80-year-old man, and he's saying, I still want this affirmation.
Well, see, the beautiful thing that I think we're also indebted to Heinz Kohut about is that, there was a long time in psychology that we did not help people understand. We didn't even understand ourselves before Kohut. That the desire for appreciation and attention and admiration, we used to think that was infantile. With the help of Heinz Kohut and self-psychology, we have come to realize that is to the psyche like oxygen to the body.
Right.
And so one of the things we have to see to in all of our ritualization in men's councils and men's work throughout the country and here and abroad is to see to it that we follow the example of St. George Patton, who was a master at lifting up soldiers that
right.
made a responsible contribution to their units and to naming their names
right.
on the radio.
Right. We talk so much about older men blessing younger men in the men's movement. I think it's equally important, as Blythe points out, for younger men to revere and honor older men. And I had a very powerful experience recently. A man who had mentored me technically many years ago in fundraising was going to turn 75, and his wife had told me about a party that I was going to be unable to attend. And his first name was Arthur, so I wrote a piece of poetry called King Arthur, and I wove in what I knew about the man's life. And then I went and I had it framed, and I got a book to go with it and a card, and I presented it to him, and he was in tears. And the next day he had the party, and he said, showing that framed poetry about his life was the most important part of his 75th birthday celebration.
Well, this is all part of ritualization. And we have just got to realize that men, part of being gloriously a man, Robert Bly and Michael Mead often like to say this at the men's conferences. They like to say men need to learn how to toast each other.
Right.
That it's an art form. And I think that we just need to lift up that part of being gloriously an empowered man is to be able to offer this kind of toast and celebration to other men.
Right. We started out with a commitment to talk about a vision for the next 3 to 5 years. And are you ready to move on to that, or do you want to?
I think let's do one more thing. Let's just list some more of these organizations. We got off on the Boy Scouts.
Oh yes. I wanted to mention, you and I are both white men. I wanted to mention with the kind of racial issues we have in our country, and these concerns about police brutality and about racism, how important it is for us as white men, especially middle-aged men, to get involved with very important groups like Junior Achievement, the NAACP, the Urban League, and other black and minority organizations which are really doing splendid work in the inner cities of our country.
There are men all over who are working with organizations like this. I think of the Big Brothers organizations, the 4-H clubs all around the country.
There are thousands of 4-H clubs locally and Boy Scout units, right?
Junior Achievement
right.
clubs. All of these community organizations, and again, these men are often very much unsung. The other thing we ought to lift up, and we don't have an exhaustive list here. Forrest and I have just been brainstorming about thinking about this, and we would invite you to join us in thinking about groups, voluntary associations that already exist, that if you got involved in, out of your men's council, you could have a ready-made network of relationship and a means of making contributions. For example, societies like the Masonic lodges, the Knights of Columbus, the university and college fraternities,
right.
The groups like the Elks, the Rotary International, Kiwanis International, Lions International, and other groups like this that give men international networks of contacts and colleagues in bringing about some of these public
right.
moves that we're talking
and I
about.
want to stress again how unsung these groups are, and how much we owe them. Like, I know that Rotary International is deeply involved in village development work in India and several other third world countries, and groups like Lions historically have made enormous contributions to eyesight and the setting up of eye banks, and other men's groups have been involved with donor transplant organizations. These are tremendously caring husbanding activities that our male colleagues have been doing for decades.
And so there are these groups, and then each of us should look at our own cities and reflect on the kinds of organizations that already exist. For example, in Chicago, we have this wonderful organization called the Community Renewal Society, which has for many, many years been making an enormous contribution to the life of our city. And there are many others like this, which this is why we have to look at the local scene,
right?
Because the only way to know, for a man to know what is available for him to have an impact as a man, is to look at his local scene, his city, his town, his county, to look at the voluntary associations that are in need of leadership.
Right, and I think what we learned in the 60s was the phrase, the personal and the political, and I think women helped us with that, and it's really true. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact of, regardless of whether we have addictive or compulsive behavior, things that we're working on in recovery, the fact is how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we spend our energy, and who we affiliate with makes enormous political statements to our family, to our children, to younger men in our community.
I want to just support what you said about the way in which the women's movement has really provided an example for us, and even women who have not been formally involved a lot in feminist circles. For example, in Chicago, it has often been the women in the neighborhoods who have organized and bonded as gender-specifically bonded groups who have taken on the drug trade in their communities.
Right.
And so, whereas we have a handful of men that have done that, we have had many women who have been moving in to fill this vacuum that men have left in their communities.
Right, and even going beyond our country into global social movements like the Human Rights Movement, Amnesty International. I know from working with that for almost 10 years that women in Latin America and other places have really been the spearhead. They have been the human rights activists and the leaders who have put their lives on the line in addressing torture and disappearance and assassinations of their leadership.
Here again, Douglas Gillette and I love to constantly come back to this theme that the real goal is mutual empowerment between the genders on these issues, and that if we have a community where the women are strong, they need to address the men and challenge and empower the men in their community. And if we have a community where the women are not adequately engaged in their public role, men, by virtue of their commitment and example, can empower the women to take on their responsibilities, which men cannot meet in exactly the same way. Let's move on, though, to the thing you were turning to when we were talking about these individual groups.
Okay, just one other thing I want to mention in passing. We've talked a lot about male leadership and male responsibility in public domain. I think we need to also remember that Robert Moore and others have also done a lot of work with gender reconciliation, bringing healing and reconciliation between men and women. And not only have we had significant movements and community protection activities started by men, but when men and women combine their energies, we get the Earth Day movement, which began in 1970, combined efforts of men and women. And when men and women of conscience come together, we get Hands Across America, which really birthed the national consciousness about the plight of the homeless in this country. So it is exciting to see what we can do together as men and women.
It's the archetypal liberator king and the archetypal liberator queen who cooperate in forming between them the kind of vision for a just and peaceful cosmos. John Stokes, I'm glad you mentioned John.
Right,
He's
a wonderful
one of the
guy,
important leaders in the men's movement. John and I love to talk about rainbow mythology.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things he's been going around to all these native peoples around the world collecting their rainbow mythology. And we hope one of these days to be able to put out a book for people on the ubiquity of rainbow mythology around the world. And one of the things we love to say is, well, this may be the age in which the Rainbow King and the Rainbow Queen become reconciled, and the mythology, the new mythology everybody's talking about, maybe that kind of mythology when we do these things on the king and queen around the country, there is a lot of energy that men and women have for that imagery of the cooperation between the true king and the true queen and creating this just and peaceful world.
Right.
Now, let me just touch on another. We mentioned Kevin Costner's
Dances with Wolves and
Dances with Wolves. The other film that came up recurrently as we were asking men about films that had inspired them was the Star Wars series. Mm-hmm. And in a recent interview that I did with Michael Toms on New Dimensions Radio, Michael was getting into some of these very same issues, and he was asking me about the kind of commitment that we have to have in both men and women, as we look at our planetary challenges now. And it was at that time, and he even brought up right at that moment, synchronistically, he brought up the Star Wars movies right at that time.
Right.
And I told Michael Toms that I was amazed that I was sitting there in my chair thinking, well, I wonder if Michael would think that I was a little bit weird if I raised the concept of the Jedi Knight at the end of the program. And we had a good laugh about that. But seriously, in that movie, there is this idea, in that series of movies, there is this idea of people remembering the old tradition of the knights who were committed to justice and to peace and to democratic social order. And we were talking about that we would not be far afield to say that what we have to see in our time is somehow that we've got men and women have to remember what it is to be Jedi Knight. And we might say that differently today. We might say we need an international sisterhood, an international brotherhood of Earth Knights who take on this task of trying to respond effectively to these enormous and sometimes immobilizing challenges.
Right. I think that it may well be that this men's movement at some point in the future will turn into a larger movement, gender reconciliation, where men and women who had decided to really steward the community will work together in a very cooperative kind of way. I want to go on now and come back to where we're going in the next couple of years. So we've talked about the vision of men's councils acting as seedbeds, providing trained, mature, masculine leadership for the great social movements of our time, and also task force activity, where not everyone in a council would need to be involved in a particular environmental cleanup or tree planting, but that men could affiliate based on a functional kind of passion, whether it's working with the homeless, working with the mentally ill. You had talked earlier as a mental health professional about the immorality of the hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of people who have been who are being dumped on the streets of American cities,
and nobody's protesting against this in a very loud voice.
Right. And because of the security issues and the physical violence issues, it seems to me that's a particularly important place where men, because they are men, need to go into those communities and deal with that situation.
Well, here you're turning to the issue of those areas where task forces are needed. We need to create them to supplement the efforts of other private and public organizations that are already working in some of these areas. In other words, men, my hope is this, that within a reasonable amount of time, it would not be unrealistic for us to say that any man, anywhere in the world, who expresses an interest in being committed to being a part of this brotherhood of reconciliation that we ought to be able to put that person in touch concretely with a network of people in his area who can help him find ways to ground his energies and channel them.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, let me just say, excuse me, Forrest, let me just say one word about something I found out recently. I was sure that there already existed an international information database that made it possible for people interested in ecological concerns to do this. When I researched the fact, I found that does not exist yet. When I consulted with my friends who are computer wizards, I found out that we have more than adequate technology to have an international database and networking database for men in this kind of work. All we need is some money, and we could create the kind of international networking database that we need to be able to give men a printout. We could give a man in any city in the world in a short period of time.
You know, there are already prototypes for that, like in the 12-step program, which Bly has rightly characterized as the largest social movement in the world. There are literally hundreds of thousands of local groups, and a businessman or woman going to London or Paris or even Africa can go into an electronic bulletin board and they can get the name of the 12-step meeting that's going to be meeting in that church basement, and they can go to it when they take their trip abroad.
Now, let me just home in on this just for a moment, because there are people who would say that the idea of planning that kind of international networking on a broad spectrum of public social issues and concerns is grandiose and unrealistic. I want to be very, very careful to make clear what I'm saying here. And what I'm saying is that it is not realistic today, given our situation, not to do this. That is to say, not to do this, not to make this kind of international networking for men available is a manifestation of pathological denial. What we have the technology, we have the men who know how to set it up. All we have to do is to gather the data, enter it into these machines. What is keeping us from doing this right now? There are two things. It's not that we don't have the vision. We've got the vision to do it. It's not that we don't have the technology. It's not that we don't have the men who have the computer and information science skills. We don't have the money, and we haven't just pulled the trigger on seeing to it that it gets done.
And yet we have seen that, I know I work in philanthropy, and one of the biggest changes in the last 5 years have been that movie stars, rock singers, and other professionals, even in the sports industry, have started whole new movements. For example, Sting, the rock star Sting, has had an enormous impact, and even a lot of the professional environmental organizations who've been around for 50 years credit him with enormous change that they were not able to bring about simply because the infusion of his public persona and the enormous amount of money he has as a professional entertainer.
Sting deserves enormous gratitude for that. And I might just add, as a good old boy, that when Willie Nelson gets the IRS paid off, we might even get Willie to have a benefit to fund some of these projects.
So it really does seem from what we're seeing men do really with their time. I know in Washington, some of the men's council men were very involved with Earth Day 1990 on the Mall, and others with homeless projects and Big Brothers. So it really does seem that men's councils are already becoming seedbeds for social change and for this task force kind of activity. Let's talk now a little bit about the structure of the men's movement, because I think that is an important issue. You know, when the women's movement began, there was such enormous pain about economic inequity and the reduced, the denigration really of the feminine, both within the household and within the public domain, that the women's movement moved very rapidly to set up a nationalized and hierarchical structure to really bring about political and economic social change. I think the issues we have to say with men are not ones economics or power and equity, that this is really a cultural movement. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And one of the things which we have to deal with is people get scared when you start talking about the men's movement.
Right.
And I agree with Michael Meade and Robert Bly when they say at this point there's no such thing as the men's movement. And I think that they say that. But it's time for us to step forward and start saying that if, this kind of ferment among men continues, what could it become? And not just what could it become in its varieties, but what would I like to see it become? And so rather than trying to present some one monolithic model for the way this should be, I think it's incumbent upon us to be creative and innovative in thinking of the different structures which we need to address different kinds of issues. And let me come back to something we said earlier, and that is to say, I think we have to be very aware of the tendency, what Alfred Adler calls the depreciation tendency.
Right.
And there's a tendency for people who are really excited about one form of men's work to depreciate people with agendas in other areas of men's work. And Adler used to say that you can always tell how crazy a man is by how much he has to just depreciate other people.
Right.
And I want us to get that on the table. We don't need to be depreciating each other. We need to be giving men credit for the contributions they make in their own specific ways, but we need to be welcoming and encouraging men to innovate and to come up with structures that respond to these different needs around the country.
Right, and also we do not need to be tolerating depreciation by women who are frightened or feel that this work is somehow inappropriate. I had a friend who is in a graduate program training to become a therapist, and he was saying how saddened he was by the attacks that women in his clinical program were making on his involvement in men's work.
I think that increasingly as men get more empowered and more organized and more involved, there will be people who want to trivialize, to slander, and to shame them for their bonding together in common cause. Frankly, I'm prepared for that. I'm prepared to deal with that. I think that men throughout history, and I mean millions of years, primate history, have known as males how to face their responsibilities and do what must be done for the common good. I have confidence, at least I have deep hope today, that our brothers around the world are going to do this again.
Right, and we've talked privately about this as men step out, as men move through recovery and release addictive behavior, whatever, as they turn to the polis, as they turn to the enormous issues that are in almost every one of our communities today, whether they be inner city or suburban, an enormous amount of energy and time is going to be required to really confront those social and economic issues. And could you say a little bit about what we confront in this tension between public domain and the private domain in the specific issues that we might confront with our wives or the women who are close to us in our lives?
Well, I think that one of the things that Lionel Tiger has pointed out that we need to be aware of is that when men turn to spending time and energy and money on commitments which are beyond the private and beyond the family and beyond the marriage and beyond the stock portfolio for the couple's retirement, this is going to be met with a lack of appreciation on the part, often, of the spouse. Men just need to realize that this has been the case for over 1 million years. And men must realize, in fact, I was interested to hear of a quote by Margaret Mead, who was lecturing in the 60s, and Lionel Tiger apparently heard this quote, in which she was saying that American men had been so domesticated by their wives that they no longer had the energy left over to put into the common concern of the public, which so badly needed attention. And I thought, here is Margaret Mead saying something that nobody else would have the guts to say at that time.
Right.
Well, we need to have the guts not only to say that today, but we need to say to men, look, an initiated man is a man who does what is necessary to meet his responsibilities as a man.
Right.
Period.
Right. That's a good point. And I want to turn now to the issue of structure, because as more men become involved in this movement and spend time, they have questions about where really is it going. Here in the Washington area, we started with one council a couple of years ago under the able leadership of Ed Honnold, and since that, hundreds of men have come in and joined with us, and that's led to a mutation and a subdividing, so we now have about 12 councils, and they're in a loose confederation called the Chesapeake Basin Men's Council. And that image of a region or a bioregion is really one that Tom Daly in Boulder has put forward, and it's really based on an ecological model, and I think it's a very sound one that where we show up geographically really shapes the ethos of our culture. And you know that yourself, that when you do a men's event in Washington, it's far different than a men's event in Dallas or in Atlanta or whatever. So it seems like what is already emerging is a series of decentralized, regionally based groups who are sharing resources and leadership. And it seems very much to be a non-partisan and a non-hierarchically based kind of social movement.
I think that it's important that that's the way it's forming, and I think that's where it will get its strength. There are those bumper stickers that say, think globally, act locally. Well, I think we need to revise that to say, think globally, act locally, and globally. And so, in other words, we have the power of the grassroots organizations who can really call for accountability on the local level in towns and cities and counties around this country and the world. But we also need to create intermediate structures of communication and networking which can help us to be inspired by each other's effort around. We need to know more about what other men are doing. Now, this is something that we need to realize is built into us as men. For example, one of the films I love is that old film, The Magnificent Seven.
Right, great cowboy movie.
And one of the things you see highlighted in that film, and it's similar to the movie The Seven Samurai.
Right.
But one of the things you see is that men who feel isolated and who do not know what other men are doing and what courage other men have in engaging dangerous tasks, they tend not to have as much courage as men who can hear about the contributions of other men in other places. Men take courage from each other. So we need to have this kind of basic grassroots local organization, but we need to be in communication increasingly with Earth warriors, with Earth Knights around the world, because we will take courage from each other. And here's the point that I really want to emphasize. What we've got to start lifting up before men is not, we've got to get out of this masochistic, this sadomasochistic image that we've been caught in for so long, that, if you really stand for something, you're just going, it's like you're just going to get shot down and you're not going to win.
Right.
We need to start presenting men with the vision and the image of what has been the case so often in history, in which men, when they cooperate with each other on a worthy task, they often win.
Right.
And we have to be setting as a goal to win on behalf of our species, our fellow species, and the earth. We shouldn't come up and intend to win. And if we have men who are presenting themselves to us as leaders who don't intend to win, then we need to find other leaders.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about this role of leadership, because we have men that we've strongly acknowledged and affirmed here at the beginning of our program: Robert Bly, Michael Mead, James Hillman, John Stokes,
Douglas Gillette, and others.
Right, and Tom Daly and others, and local men like Ed Honnold, who played a key role in forming the Washington Men's Council. And then there are men like yourselves who have a much broader theoretical and depth background, interdisciplinary background. What is the role of leadership, and how do we best maximize the leadership talent that we do have?
Well, the role, I think that's a pretty straightforward thing. The role of leaders is to help us maintain some scope in our vision. The old biblical thing, without a vision, the people perish. Well, without a vision, men perish, and they take a lot of people with them.
Right.
So men have to, the leaders in our movement have to lift up a vision of initiated, empowered men who are lords of the four quarters, who know how to live joyously, who are willing to live with a lot of gold energy, and who are not ashamed of trying to pursue some masculine greatness. And who, as I like to say when we're talking about the lover archetype, men who can strut and not be ashamed of it. And so you've got to have, that's one of the things that we love about Robert Bly. I mean, he is shamelessly exhibitionist. And we love him for it.
And me too.
And me too. And we are empowered by it.
And Hillman has no qualms about his tap dancing and about showing his own grandiosity.
I love to say about Jim that you probably are seeing the king in his dance form right there. That's right. He's tap dancing.
That's right. Well, there's an important book I want to mention. It's not very well known in the men's movement circles, but it's by Robert Fritz, and it's called The Path of Least Resistance. The reason I bring it up here is Fritz did it. He's a composer of classical music, and he spent several years in the woods just observing nature very closely. And what he was after was really getting a hold of a depth understanding of the creative process. And what he came to realize was that the importance of outcome. And when he looked back at human group behavior and individual decision making, he saw that most decision-making was based on some kind of condition. I'll do this if. And he said the only decision-making that really produces historical consequences is claiming an outcome, a very specific, grounded outcome.
I believe.
And so I think we need to ask of our leaders, of men's councils and of support groups, to articulate with us in a collegial way what is the specific outcome that we want here. Are we wanting recovery? Are we wanting training and ritual process? Are we wanting to deal with the homeless? Are we wanting to set up task forces, or what?
Are we wanting all of the above, and are we wanting to plug the right men into leadership in these different areas? One of the things you're talking about right there, I think it was some important masculine leader who said, "By their fruits ye shall know them." And I think we need to lift this up, and if you've got men who are presenting themselves as leaders in the men's movement, and they're going to offer us initiation, and they have no public vision, they have no public morality, they're clearly narcissistic personality disorders, and they're into totally depreciating other leaders who are doing different things with different commitments, then we need to know those men by their fruits, and we need to find other leaders. And so Adler often said that the mark of maturation is the capacity to cooperate with other individuals and to encourage the other individuals in the pursuit of social interest. And I think that we could hardly do better than that in saying what we expect of our leaders.
Right, and I think when we look back over just the last 30 years, when we look at Martin Luther King Jr. or John Kennedy or Cesar Chavez, we see the importance of men really who had broad vision, but also had a very specific outcome in mind about what they wanted to have happen in this country. In the just a few minutes of we're going to be winding up to go back and conclude this retreat here in Washington, I wanted us just to dream a little bit together about again the future of where we're going in the next couple of years. And as you look out across the nation and the world, what are some of the key structures or some of the key activities that you think we need to begin thinking about putting into place? The kinds of maybe publications or computer work or books, training structures. What comes to mind there?
Well, we're having a lot of creativity come forth now in terms of writing about masculine psychology. There are a lot of good books coming out, a lot of good tapes coming out, and those are being made available through Wingspan. People can find out about them through Wingspan and other men's publications. We don't have too many men's publications now. Right. We need to have men use their creativity in coming up with others and seeing if they can fly. But we need to be networking, and we need to be finding ways in which we can do this on an ongoing basis so that we can really help people realize the extent of masculine generativity that already exists on this planet, that
right.
we can know about the men who are already involved, already committed, already acting on behalf of this common project.
I think we need to say that this is a movement for every man on the globe, and if you saw the 2020 program the other night like Robert and I did, and you saw the diversity of men, it totally refutes this notion about where are the plumbers, where are the restaurant people,
right.
Where are the upper class guys like that Texas wildcatter that owned a $100 million company. I mean, this is a movement of men of all classes, of all races.
And this is something that a lot of the academics told us could never happen.
Right, and this interracial men's conference just a week ago was
Robert
astounding.
Bly, Michael Mead, and Jim Hillman just had 50 black men and 50 white men together for what turned out to be an absolutely exciting, innovative new thrust in bringing together men of different cultural backgrounds and racial backgrounds in this work. So this is a time to be hopeful. And it's a time for men to take stock about the stewardship of their own particular gifts. And one thing we need to say, this is coming from the bottom up. And to all of you men out there, we don't have an excess of leadership. You are needed. And we want you to be generals in this movement. And if you don't yet feel like you're ready to be a general, then be a colonel. And if you're not ready to do that, find a level where you feel like you can plug in and then do some training and get other men to empower you so that you can take on wider responsibilities in this. But the most important thing, let's don't leave the lover out here.
Right.
Let's have a good time
right. And
while we do it.
Yeah.
There's an alchemy in this men's work. And we all have to take stock of the parts of us that we still feel are kind of lead and dead, I might say.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to realize that down underneath the surface, there's a lot of masculine gold in all of you and all of us. And this is what the wonderful story that Bly brought to us in Iron John is talking about. It is talking about a man's increasingly being able to let his gold shine and to take on his full empowerment for the wider world. And that's what we think all this is about.
Right. In conclusion, I would like to just read what I think is a very potent piece of poetry that we used. And It's a piece of poetry by Nikos Kazantzakis from a book called Saviors of God, and I used it to introduce how I feel about Robert Moore, and I also think it really brings forward the unique and unrepeatable energy that each one of us have as men at this time in history. So please receive this as a gift, as a blessing from Robert Moore and myself. As soon as you were born, a new possibility was born with you. A free heartbeat stormed through the great, sunless heart of your race. Whether you would or not, you brought a new desire, a fresh rhythm, a deeper sorrow. As you walk, you cut open and create that riverbed into which the stream of your descendants shall enter and flow. You do not govern now only your own small, insignificant existence. You are a throw of the dice on which, for a moment, the entire fate of humanity is gambled. When you rise to a valorous deed, all mankind rises valorous with you. And when you shrink in fear, you degrade innumerable generations coming after you. I am not alone. I am not alone. Four great ones stand within me to aid me at every moment. Let this vision inflame you.
This concludes Dancing the Four Quarters, an interview on masculine empowerment and development of the male psyche by Robert Moore and Forrest Craver. This recording is published by IS Publications. All content copyright by Dr. Robert Moore. Duplication or broadcast without the express permission of IS Publications is prohibited. All other rights reserved by IS Publications and Robert Moore. For additional information about Robert Moore's theory of personal spiritual transformation, or to order other titles by Dr. Moore, please visit www.robertmoore-phd.com. To find out more about IS Publications, for reproduction permissions, or to order similar titles by other authors, please visit www.is-publications.com.